welcome back to another devlog. This is week 97. So last week I went in and wrapped up the work on the actual menu artwork, and all that was looking pretty good. So this week I kind of shifted back to my regularly scheduled programming, and this week was all about getting back to menu functionality. So previously the menu and the pause menu, it basically the main menu functionality was just basically allowing you to navigate and start the game. That was pretty much it. Everything in between that, especially the whole settings panel, the whole settings screen, was really just placeholder stuff, except for the volume. That was actually working. You could control that and set the volume. And I hooked up that previously where the persistence sticks around. But everything else, each one of these sections just had a lot of stuff in there that was just their originally placeholder stuff. And I spent this week putting a lot of work. It was a surprising amount of work. That I um, put into this menu system. Um, and so the first thing I kind of started in on was like getting the kind of the window mode working. So this doesn't work in the actual editor, but if you do a build, a production build, and you switch this around, it will actually switch between full screen and windowed. So I had to hook up the backend code and test it in production, make sure it works, and it does, which is cool. The next thing was doing resolution. This wasn't actually so bad. Hooking up the actual code to control the resolution selection, that functionality actually worked. Um, when you select this, it would change the resolution in production, which is all good. Nothing fancy. There's no screens like, are you sure you want to keep this like other games? It's just like, it's just changing it. But the thing that I ran into was this drop-down menu, especially they had given me a third-party package, but it works nice with mouse and keyboard. But if you're using a controller, there was just a whole host of issues to where um, it was it didn't handle it didn't handle automatic selection with the controller, like scrolling making sure that the current selection is within the viewable window. So I made several attempts to kind of, based on like your interaction, your selection, to actually adjust the window to make sure that the actual selection is in view and it doesn't go beyond the view. My first attempts were very hot garbage, and it just doesn't work very well, and it was working different in production, but eventually I found a solution like already implemented with these other tabs, these other panels that use like this scroll bar, and I was able to use that better to get like a better scrolling thing. I'd say it's good enough. I tested it a whole bunch, but it was real tricky. Like, I guess the overall point and theme of this week was like, there was this whole package, it brings you about like 80% there, but there was so many like little rough edges where I had to get really familiar with the menu system to make sure that I ironed out. So I did like a whole lot of testing. It's just like little things that you wouldn't expect in its actual behavior and performance. Like, there's just so many little cases. At one point, it felt like it was so overwhelming because I just kept spotting issue after issue, and it's just like, which one? I had to make a list. Like, what do I tackle first? But once I kind of chipped away at it once, it was like 30 small little issues with like little cases, like, okay, you're using controller, like especially switching from controller to keyboard, like detecting the change and like updating properly, or when you're you know, if you're in the menu and then you cancel out to make sure that um, um, you know, it resets properly, or you know, if you press start and you exit completely, then you should start on the start screen again. I simplified things. There was some real weird things going on, like with um, you know, now if you switch the tabs, it'll always start on the first one, and I had to make sure that, especially for controller, you have to make sure that the connections are there. That means like they all hook up in a chain properly on loading and stuff. So that means when you press up, it'll go to the right spot. What happened there? But anyways, but it was actually, it looks pretty rough on the actual scrolling in the editor. But if you actually do it in a production build, the actual scrolling, um, it lines up well. Um, to where you're actually selecting with the controller. So I had to make sure, yeah, so I just did a bunch of testing and, you know, really had to put a lot of work to smooth out the rough edges and make sure that everything is working how it should. Just noticed something else, like when you're on resolution, if you press up, it should you have to press up twice. It's just things like that, like make sure make sure it works both for mouse and keyboard, and also for and also for controller. And then switching between the two, there's no weird, odd issues or major issues. There's just a lot of different things. So I've gotten really familiar with this UI system and a lot deeper into like how it actually works under the hood. You know, how everything's called with like panel managers and stuff. And so I went and did the rest of these functionality to the list. Like some of them are here already, and I had to add a couple things like brightness and stuff, but this one new one I added, it doesn't actually do anything just yet, but these do. Like frame rate, I made sure like if you switch between these, it'll actually do the system setting um, to you know, either cap the frame rate or apply VSync, and then also with persistence. So when you change these, it remembers and then not only remembers not when you load the menu, but the game manager can read those persistent settings and load those settings on the start of the game. So it's like kind of a twofold thing. Otherwise, the settings wouldn't apply unless you open the menu. So brightness is there. That's yet to be done. But the other interesting thing that I tackled was actually quality. So I had to go in and take my original I think it's like quality settings. And what I did, I cleaned this up and I made 3 main profiles, high, medium, and low. And kind of went through again with AI and kind of discussed and looked at these settings. And kind of, there was a couple settings in here that I didn't, it was a little bit too heavy because I wasn't using VR anymore. So I really went through all these settings with a fine-tooth comb and made sure it's like this high case that I've tested with, that it is where it should be. And then I went through again for each one of these and kind of downgraded the quality settings, the internal settings for these different quality levels. So like the shadows are worse, or the shadows are completely off and low, and this allows support for like lower end systems and stuff. And then when I'm hooking up then I had to hook it up to this menu to make sure the back end, like when you switch it, it will actually go to these different profiles and such. So yeah, you can actually see like the aliasing is cut down and things like that. So or you go back to high. Oh, it's interesting. It was working. Not sure why it decided not to work. I gotta check that again, but you know, maybe it's because I just touched these settings or something. Let's try it one more time. Medium. It doesn't seem to be switching. I gotta recheck that. But it was working. And one of the other things I did was, since I was working mostly in the settings panel, and this whole UI is actually shared, instead of duplicating and fixing duplicate issues, I went and I made a prefab out of the settings portion. So that way when I save it, I just unpack the main thing, because I don't really need that. Now I can, if I make changes to the settings prefab, I can actually save those changes and use that in my menu as well. So everything outside of it, that's custom to the either the pause menu or the main menu, but the settings, that is actually common and shared. So you just have to abstract like that, otherwise you're fixing multiple issues and you have an error in one place fixed and the error still exists in another. You don't want that kind of thing. So yeah, so basically qualities work, and same thing with anisotropic. That's a one that the AI didn't recommend, but this is already in there. But you can set this, and it's, you know, just little different little quality settings you can mess with, and it's all persistent. So I got all that done. I was feeling happy about that, and I kind of went back to, okay, what's next? The next thing was kind of like it's kind of like localization. Like I had to get localization in for, so every little text item here has to be like connected to the localization system. So it can only, so this wasn't already set up, but I kind of had to go in and get familiar with. The nice thing is that this package came with its own localization system, so that kind of saved me a step. But I had to go in and kind of understand it, read the documentation, and be like, okay, and then kind of test things out, like how do you set up certain things, like how, you know, so I kind of had to like play around and, you know, set up a test, you know, a little test prototype and be like, okay, you know, hook this up so when I hit a button and go to a different profile like Dutch or that's German, it'll localize everything. So just doing one thing and then testing, like, okay, that works, and then figuring out how these, you know, how the relation, it really boils down to this component called it's just like, I had to add these everywhere, localized objects, and you can either point at a text mesh pro component, or if it's on top of another one of these reach components, you can actually just set it to component driven, and it'll have internal code to know how to derive certain localized keys and stuff. And you can pick the key. It's a very good system. One of these things, and it actually works pretty good. So, but it was just a little bit of work, like going in and finding each, you know, UI element and hooking it up. Most of it was already hooked up and translated for the German, so that way I could do a test. But I had to make sure there's keys for everything. Like this new one, I didn't. I added this, but I haven't added a key for it yet. But this kind of lets me know, like, I can do testing in different languages. Like, this is like the default. Like, if like something is missing, like a value or a key is missing, it'll print out here, and that kind of reminds me that I have to add it for this language. But other than that, like I went through and hooked up all the little parts that need to be translated, like all the little text and stuff. These little things don't need, these little keys, they don't need to be translated, even though they're like Latin alphabet. They don't need to be translated to like Russian Cyrillic or Chinese characters. Those are fine. But no, that didn't. That's an interesting problem. That actually didn't translate on updates. See, these are still English, so it's still little things like that I have to. Yeah, see, these updated outside, but this didn't actually, borderless, that didn't actually update, but if you go back, it'll reload. So most of these will update when you switch the language, and that's great. And then it's persistent, but I just spotted like this. These little texts didn't actually update for these little menus here, so I'll have to figure that out. Yeah, so any issue that I spot, there's just like 100 of these small little issues, but the more issues I solved, the more stable it became, and it just, now it feels like a really solid. Yeah, there's not any of these little oddities or ways to get into a weird state. So yeah, and then I figured out how to add another table like Spanish. So like there's literally no translations or keys for anything. There's keys, but there's no translation. So all the values are missing. But yeah. So what I'll do? Let's go back to English. Or and then I made sure that the translations were hooked up on the pause screen. And then also I went back to the main menu and made sure the main menu was localized. So we're mainly focused on the settings screen this whole week. The main menu screen, there wasn't, there's stuff there to work on, but it's mainly we're ironing out issues and functionality for the settings portion of the app. Got this thing working and just made sure that just do a lot of testing, make sure that a lot of these little edge cases that are not just putting that polish on, that robustness, that solidity, that makes sure it's rock solid. So that's the localization. And what was I doing? Oh, I added the little logo up there. They have a nice little thing where you can add in the logo, and they have this nice little this UI manager that allows you to specify like a color scheme to use, and fonts and colors and all that. It's actually pretty handy. But that's mostly what I did. So it's just a lot of work into that menu. It's a lot better now, a lot more filled out. There's still more work to be done for sure. Like I have a little bit of a list, but the last thing I worked on this week um, was keyboard remapping. Previously in the game, I hadn't supported keyboard. I had XR support, but I've strayed away from doing, um, VR XR support. So I had to go into my input actions, and I kind of cleaned out all the old XR stuff and really kind of made sure that all these actions were, there's no like extra stuff in there. I broke the UI a little bit, but I managed to fix that. But mostly I added in and tested one at a time, like adding in keyboard for the input support for the keyboard. So I need a keyboard support because A, for PC, that's like, yeah, you can't just skip that. And then B, if you're adding keyboard support, you have to be able to allow for remapping of the actions. So, piece by piece, I was able to add keyboard support. So now I'm playing with the keyboard and mouse. It actually works pretty good. It wasn't too hard. It was a little bit tricky doing the aiming, but for the most part, it's actually pretty good. The only thing that doesn't work quite right with the keyboard is the actual quick turn functionality. Because when you're moving, you're using the WSAD keys, and it can't really tell very well, like if you're doing like a quick direction turn. The key is either on and off. There's no gradient. There's no like 0 to 1 like you would with a joystick. So I kind of had to disable that for keyboard, and that also led to a bit of a problem because the quick turn also it also works on it also does the quick turn detection to kind of decide which kind of jump you do. And right now the jumping, it's functional, but it doesn't really behave similarly to what it would be on the controller. So I kind of that's something I have to kind of fix up for for keyboard support. But for the most part, it has actually all the other functionality like crouching and aiming and stuff. It's all pretty good. So there's just a bit of work to do, but that's for later. Once I got all that done, I went back to trying to figure out, okay, now that I got keyboard support working, how do you do remapping, right? I guess you can't select these with the controller. You're probably going to be using the mouse and keyboard to select these anyways, for remapping, but basically I started testing with one, and it's a bit of a challenge. And I left off on this. I'm kind of in the middle because there's instead of doing like when you select to remap, instead of doing like an overlay to block, I made sure it's just a dot, so it's like it's telling the user, okay, now enter a key to remap, and the back end it actually works. It actually does remap. So when I press the H button, now it's the H button. So all that's functional and working, which is great. But this whole process has a bunch of edge cases. Like one of the edge cases, like what if you select multiple ones? I actually fixed this one where it knows how to manage and cancel out the previous one. Okay. But there's other edge cases like yeah, it's like canceling out and then resetting. Let's try this. Yeah, so it can reset to the default one that it's at instead of the binding. But there's other things where you can like get duplicates and stuff. Like if I do, well, I block duplicates now, but there's like another edge, like where I want to do like swapping. If I do a duplicate, I want to be able to swap for another one. It just takes a little bit more testing, but it's mostly there and mostly working. But the tricky part comes in when I have to like remap like movement, because it's called like a composite. It's not just one key, so I have to make sure that movement can actually be assigned correctly, and then just do a bunch of testing to make sure that the user can't get any like duplicates or anything like that. So there's a bunch of cases still have to iron out as far as movement and stuff, and yeah, a bit more work on this, but I figure, yeah, next week I'll be able to get it pretty solid as far as remapping keyboard functionality. What else do we have? Yeah, so this will take me into next week as far as developing. There's things like brightness, where I have to make sure that there's like a screen process in the beginning that kind of like for the very first time you can actually set the brightness of the game according to like a standard definition, and then also that you can actually do the same thing in the settings to readjust the brightness. What else is there for next week? Just a couple extra nicety toggles. You mean something like something to disable the camera shake, like accessibility options, and just things that make sense. Like when you go into the general, right now it's only this one. There was a bunch of other stuff they didn't really apply to my game, like set the camera, you know, the camera speed, or that doesn't really apply to a top-down game. But anything, I could leave this open for anything that I do want to allow the user to adjust or change in the game, so in this general settings. But there's a few more things to add here and make sure they're functional, hooked up. So I'll be working on the menu a little bit more next week, and I'll probably get done with it sometime. I'll do one more build to test that everything is working in production, and it's basically, at that point, it's basically on to some other things. I think I have to do like one or two more artworks, like one more artwork for like the first level, and then I have to test out with a production build um, if like levels load correctly in between each other. So yeah, more to do next week, but I'll wrap up this menu stuff next week probably, and it'll be looking pretty good. So that's about all I have to talk about this week. Just a bunch of work polishing up this menu and ironing out any of these little issues that I spot. And yeah, there's not much more to say, so I'll sign off here and we'll check you out next week. Bye.